Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back. Now, yesterday we talked about Trump's new doctrine, Venezuela, Greenland, and why Canada's Arctic just got a lot more dangerous.
And today we're bringing it home because jets and radar are one thing, but what really decides whether Canada can stand up to all this is what's happening inside our own borders, our healthcare, our democracy, and whether regular people are actually willing to defend this country.
So if you haven't watched yesterday's video yet, you can still follow along because yesterday was about the outside threat, and today is what we've got going on inside our own country.
So let's start with something that Canadians sometimes weirdly get really shy about: healthcare. Because this isn't just a nice social program, healthcare is literally part of our national defense.
And if that sounds dramatic, just take a look at what's happening south of the border. In the United States, your access to basic healthcare is chained to your job. You want to leave a toxic workplace? You want to start your own business? You want to take a risk? Well, great. But you're also rolling the dice on whether you can still see a doctor or walk into a hospital without going broke.
We have American friends paying over $3,000 a month for health insurance. That is first-hand accounts of actually talking to them personally. And on top of that, they're on the hook for huge deductibles before the plan even starts to help.
And when you live under that kind of pressure, it shapes everything. You don't rock the boat at work. You don't take time off when you're sick. You definitely think twice about joining a protest that might get you fired. Basically, free speech still exists on paper, but there's this invisible hand on your shoulder saying, "Careful, you can't afford to lose that job."
Yeah, that's not freedom. That is a very polite cage. And it's not an accident. If people are constantly worried about keeping their employer-sponsored coverage and staying one step ahead of medical bills, well, they have a lot less energy left to question why their government is even raiding Venezuela or threatening half the hemisphere.
Now, let's put that next to the American war machine. For most of our lives, the U.S. has been involved in one conflict after another. It treats airstrikes like a stage cue. 1 week it's Somalia, then Yemen, then Iraq or Iran, then Nigeria, then Venezuela. Different names, but the same pattern.
And every time, if you ask why, you get some vague lines about security and strength and freedom. Meanwhile, the companies that build the weapons are smiling all the way to the bank, and regular Americans are still arguing with their insurance company over a hospital bill from 6 months ago.
That is the real model. Keep people scared of losing basic care, keep them scrambling to pay premiums, keep them just stable enough to go to work and pay taxes, and then pour a huge chunk of that money into permanent military operations.
So when we say Canada shouldn't copy the American system, we're not just talking about kindness, we're talking about power. A country where people can see a doctor without begging a boss first is a country where people have more freedom to stand up when a neighbor starts acting like an empire.
And this is where the Maple MAGA crowd come crashing into the story. Because they look at Trump's America and they don't see the fear and the precarity of the situation. They see a fantasy. They see lower taxes at the top. They see private hospitals. They see a leader who can bark orders, ignore international law, and still get cheers at rallies. And they think, yes, bring that here.
You can hear it in the way they talk. They sneer at Canadian healthcare. They call it a disaster, a burden. It's broken, and some kind of socialist scheme that needs to be blown up. They complain about wait times, and their solution is not to fix what's broken and make it better, but it's to turn it into a marketplace and let people sink or swim.
And look, we know that the system's not perfect. We sit in the same waiting rooms as everyone else. But the answer is to fix it, not blow it up. Countries like Australia and the Scandinavian states, they managed to run strong public systems with some private options on the side without throwing people to the wolves.
And let's remember how this actually works in real life. Canada has a triage system. If it's an emergency, if it's serious, you get seen. You don't sit there for 8 hours scrolling your phone unless you're there for a cough or something. Hey, do people fall through the cracks? Yes, because humans run the system, not robots. But for the most part, when something is truly wrong, you get emergency care.
I know that when I had chest pain, we called an ambulance. They came, they got me straight to emergency, they ran the test, fixed me up, and sent me home. The only bill was about $80 for the ambulance. Not 5 figures, not a fight with the insurance company, and I didn't have to mortgage my home to pay for it all.
And that's what the Maple Megas want you to forget. Sure, this system needs work, but it does work. The choice is between rolling up your sleeves to improve it or blowing it up and pretending the American model is some kind of upgrade.
So the choice isn't broken public versus magical private. The real choice is to do the work to make ours better or cash out and copy the worst parts of the American model.
Meanwhile, Trump is deporting people into high-security prisons in El Salvador and cutting services back home so hard that families we actually know are drowning in monthly costs, or they're choosing to go without insurance altogether. That is the system the Maple MAGA want to import, not by accident, but on purpose.
So when they wave flags and shout about freedom, remember what they're really cheering for. They want a Canada where your ability to see a doctor or show up at a protest or run for office depends on whether you fit into their idea of who deserves a safety net. In other words, the rich.
They're not just applauding raids on Venezuela, they're applauding a model where power runs one way, down. From the leaders to the donors to the corporations, and everybody else had better be quiet and be grateful.
And here's the part that actually makes it worse. While Poilievre and his crowd are busy looking south with rose-colored glasses, Trump is perfectly happy to use Canada as a prop when it suits him. He slaps on tariffs, ramps up economic warfare, and openly invades countries with minerals, oil, and resources while threatening Greenland, Cuba, Colombia, and hinting that Canada is next. And our own conservatives still rush to his events, cheer him on, echo his lines, and keep framing him as some kind of strong partner.
That's not someone putting Canada first. That's someone showing loyalty to MAGA and hoping no one asks why. That's someone keeping himself in the dark on purpose. Remember, Trump refused to show his tax returns and walked into the Oval Office without a proper security check because the system let him. Poilievre has refused his own top-level clearance here as well, which means he doesn't even want to know which MPs might be compromised.
Now, when a would-be prime minister doesn't want access to that information, you really have to wonder whose interests he's really protecting. It doesn't look like a man getting ready to defend Canada, I'll tell you that. It looks like a man keeping his options open with the same MAGA crowd that's cheering Trump on while he carves up the hemisphere. Follow the money, people.
So when people tell you, don't be so hard on Trump or the Maple MAGAs and focus on China, remember this, China is not out here threatening to turn us into the 51st state. Trump is.
Now, we can criticize Beijing's abuses without pretending that Trump's America is some kind of moral alternative. Our job is to keep Canada from getting dragged under by either one. And that starts with not handing power to a crowd that thinks Trump is the standard to copy.
And just for the record, we've been to China about a half a dozen times. Life there is not the cartoon horror story that some Western politicians try to sell you. People are working, raising families, riding high-speed trains while we fight over basic rail projects. In a lot of tech and infrastructure, they are decades ahead of us, and that scares Washington.
Now, that doesn't excuse the surveillance, the censorship, the human rights abuses. It just proves what we've been saying for years. The West got comfortable and rested on its laurels. And now, instead of fixing that, Trump's answer is to bully the hemisphere and drag everyone into his Don Roe doctrine.
Now, I know some people watching this are thinking, okay, but what are we supposed to do about this? We're just regular Canadians, not generals or diplomats, and true. But that's where I think the last year has been quietly incredible. Because every time we do a video about defense or sovereignty or Trump's doctrine, we get the same messages. People asking, where do I sign up? Where is this civilian force that I don't know about? How do I put my name down?
And that tells us something important. Canadians aren't sitting at home shrugging. They know that we have a lot to lose, not just territory on a map, but public health care, public schools, a justice system that still at least tries to be independent even when it fails, and a basic sense of civility.
Hey, we're not perfect, but most Canadians are decent. We care if our neighbors fall through the cracks. We don't mind paying into things that help other people's kids. That's the whole point of living in a country instead of a gated and guarded community.
So when Poilievre yells down with socialism, what is he really saying? After everything that just happened in Venezuela, that's his takeaway? Is the plan everyone out for themselves? Because that is not Canada. That's just importing the worst parts of the American model and pretending that it's freedom.
Americans are often pushed into service because they have to be. It's a path to school, to a steady paycheck, to basic health care. The uniform is a ticket into the system and out of poverty. Canadians are different. When we talk about 300,000 civilians ready to be part of a defense force, we're not talking about people chasing benefits. We're talking about people who want to protect something they believe in.
We've had tons of messages from people our age saying, I'm too old to do basic training, but I'm not too old to fight for this country. And they're right. You're never too old to defend Canada. You might not be flying a jet, but you can defend a polling station. You can protect critical infrastructure. You can help your community stay organized in a crisis.
Think about what we all watched over the last 20 years. The big powers rolled into Afghanistan with the best hardware money could buy and still couldn't break the will of the people who were rooted in their land and prepared to endure. That is what commitment looks like, whatever you think of the politics.
Now, imagine that kind of resolve in a Canadian context. Teachers, nurses, electricians, coders, students, retirees, people who have decided that not my problem is no longer an option. That's what 300,000 civilians in a defense force really means.
It means that if anyone ever tries to treat Canada the way that Trump treats Venezuela or threatens Greenland, they're not just taking on an army, they're taking on a country that actually cares about itself. And by the way, to our friends in Greenland and Denmark, you can count on Canada. If our politicians don't back you up, they're going to hear about it from us. And unlike the USA, our politicians still have to listen when Canadians speak.
So let's pull this all together today. Yesterday, we walked through how Trump's new doctrine isn't a theory anymore. We watched him grab a Venezuelan president, drag him to New York, talk openly about taking over their oil, and then treat Greenland like a future American real estate deal. We talked about how that puts Canada on the map whether we like it or not, stuck between a US that wants to run the entire hemisphere and a Russia that's happy to watch NATO crumble.
We also talked about our own choices, Ottawa locking us into an initial batch of 16 F-35s that plug our Air Force straight into an American-controlled system, and how we need to stop the rest of the orders and choose fighter jets like the Swedish Gripen.
And we summed up how Prime Minister Mark Carney is working to gain more independence from the USA by investing in the Arctic, opening posts in Nuke and Anchorage, upgrading radar, and trying to build a security plan that doesn't just assume Washington will always be sane.
And this is the part the Maple MAGA crowd never understands. Trump and his handlers look at us and see nothing but a resource depot. Oil, water, gas, minerals, shipping lanes. They don't see the fact that we've built a country where, for all our mistakes, the basic idea is that our value isn't measured by how profitable we are to a defense contractor.
If we throw that away, if we let Maple MAGA rip up our systems and hand us American-style you're-on-your-own society, then we will have done their work for them. We will have hollowed out the very things that make Canada worth defending.
But we don't have to let that happen. We can defend and rebuild healthcare instead of undermining it. We can build a civilian defense that is about protecting communities, not playing soldier in the woods.
And we can keep talking. To our American friends who still believe that their country can be more than this. To our Canadian friends who think Trump is just noisy fun. To the people in our own lives who roll their eyes and say, "Oh, you're being dramatic," while a president with nuclear weapons jokes about annexation.
We're not being dramatic. We're paying attention, because this is what it looks like when a superpower refuses to hold itself accountable. This is what it looks like when an old imperial mindset gets a new name and a new set of weapons.
Listen, Canada may be small, but we are not helpless. We have a social contract that still works better than most. We have institutions that can be repaired instead of burned down. And we have people who are already asking where to stand when it counts.
Don't let anyone convince you that being ready to defend is a place that makes you extreme. It's just making you Canadian.
And if Trump wants to run a hemisphere built on fear and endless war, well, that's his problem. Our job is to make sure that when he looks north, all he sees is a country that knows its own value and is ready to defend it.
Because in the end, what really keeps Canada safe? It's not just the jets and the radar, but the people who have already decided this country is worth fighting for.
So remember, if this connected a few dots for you, make sure to hit like so YouTube knows that this isn't just background noise. Every little bit helps.
And make sure you're subscribed with the bell on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.
If you want the deeper dive, well, we read about all of this over on Substack as well at the Planet Democracy. And if you want to support our work directly, you can join our YouTube membership, the A-Team, or grab a t-shirt or a mug because this genuinely helps us do this every single day.
And hey, we're also on Facebook too. We're everywhere.
So thanks for watching today. Be Canada strong, and we'll see you tomorrow.